Welcome to Heart Speak Podcast, episode 292, The Way of the Compassionate Shaman. Well, hello there, wherever you're in the world. It's good to be back with you. And today we're going to look at one of my most interesting of subjects, shamanism. I've always been fascinated with the different aspects of shamanism that I'm going to share with you. And why did this subject come to mind? Was because of the full moon we had recently in Scorpio, squaring its ruler, Pluto, causing us to feel the intensity of this energy and causing us to dive deep into ourselves, look inside ourselves, rather than staying on the surface where everything feels calm and happy. Now, it doesn't mean that being calm and happy isn't okay, but transformation occurs when we have the willingness to go inside, to look inside, to open cupboards, to clear things out and see what's really inside us. And this is the way of the shaman. And I entered that word compassionate because it's done with love. When we do go on a shamanistic journey, an inner journey, we need to make sure that compassion is by our side, both as a witness and as a non-judgmental lover. Because sometimes it is difficult to look inside. Sometimes we don't want to own those pieces that are not acceptable both by ourselves or society. But there's nothing inside you or me that is unacceptable and not loved by the Great Mother. So we're going to look a little deeper into the whole project of shamanism, the art, which is as ancient as time itself, and that has been respected and honored through every culture around the world. They may have been called medicine men, witch doctors, priest healers, just a wise woman. Doesn't matter their name, but what it really represented was this wise, loving healer, psychic, occultist who could bring about changes. Because the meaning of the word shaman comes from Siberia, meaning a fire or to burn or to transform. So the feature that is so prevalent in every society of shamanism is, I am transforming you so that you may know yourself as the illuminated being, the enlightened one, the whole one, the healed one. And that requires transformation, breaking something down, accepting death and accepting rebirth. And that can be our greatest challenge, as we like to hold on to what we know and stay away from anything that makes us fearful, especially that which is the unknown, the mystery. Before I go any further with this, let's just look at what's going on in the sky, which has real relevance to this. So on May the 2nd, Pluto turned retrograde in Aquarius. Aquarius has been about gatherings, community, self-accountability, self-reflection. And we've been moving forward where more and more people gathering together who in the past would not have been seen to come together. They had different beliefs maybe or different religions, but we're now all seeing a bigger picture and saying, if we come together, we can create a healthy community for the next 7 generations. Now, with Pluto going backwards, that doesn't mean that's all going to stop, but it does say, now I need to find that community within myself. I need to respect myself. I need to not isolate parts of me because I can't accept them, which is perfect for this subject matter of shamanism, the coming together, the retrieval of parts of ourselves. And as Pluto goes backwards until September the 2nd, it will then enter Capricorn again, where it was for a long, long period of time, from around 2008. So it's going to go back into Capricorn. And remember, Capricorn's about structures and institutions and corporations, blah, 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 that I've talked about before. And it will be stirring up the last embers of institutions, corporations, etc., that don't seem to want to accept a more community, self-accountable way of being. And I can see things coming to light where there's lack of accountability, lack of honesty, because Aquarius says, I see it all. Why are you trying to hide? So I can see from that September the 2nd date until then Pluto will turn direct again on October the 10th. So there's going to be a lot of stirring up in that time. And then from October the 11th, Pluto will move forward in Capricorn again. So there may be a restructuring that happens, but also a redefining of what it means to be in our power, give away our power, who it is that we're offering that power to. And really, I think the decrease in the need for those leaders, or at least the leaders working for the people rather than the people working for the leaders. I think we're going to see a lot of changes, especially in structures like the WHO, WF. And I think there's going to be a balancing out happening. Now, Pluto will move back into Aquarius on November the 20th, which some of you may know is a date after a date that's going to happen at the beginning of November if you live in the US. And I think in other countries also that seem to have elections at this time. So November the 20th onwards, I think we're going to see a very different type of governance. Again, not talking about an individual, but I think the way in which we will want to be governed is going to change. And I think that's going to be exciting. I think there'll be far less hierarchy, far more accountability, and far more transparency. Thank you. Let's hope that happens. And so we return to the subject of shamanism as beings, special people who often had decades of training to get them to the place where they were honored as the wise people, the healer, the shaman. And how did they pick a shaman? Well, in some traditions, they would pick the person because they themselves were disadvantaged, maybe through their body, through the mental state, etc. And it was the belief that, well, if you're in some way disabled, you will go and look for healing for yourself and therefore help others. That certainly is true that many of the shamans had some sort of disablement themselves. Now, in other traditions, they would be chosen because they have generations of shamans within their family. And of course, we could say they were chose to be born into a family of shamans so that they could take up that role. And I know that my friend Rose Perry, who passed, who was said to be one of the last Tohungas, she was born very close to a very sacred mountain in the North Island. And she did come from a family who were shamanistic. But because of the way she was born, the way she had her cap, the waters hadn't been broken over the top of her head, they said, aha, this is a wise person being born. And she told me that she says, I'm the last of the Tohungas. And I said, why? And she said, because I'm being told if the people haven't got it yet by following someone else, they'll never get it. It's time for them to follow their own inner shaman, their own inner healer. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're in training, you don't need someone who's helping you, an expert shaman, or something that's going to really guide you, but they're walking with you. And hence my word compassion. They're witnessing, they're walking with you non-judgmentally, but they are guiding you. And those guides may be inner guidance. I personally have always had inner teachers, inner guides. And sometimes they are animal-like. We talk about totem animals. So your totem animal is one which you relate very strongly to within your own DNA, if I put it that way. But I'm not talking about physical DNA, I'm talking about spiritual DNA. What is your animal soul family? For me, it's my whales, dragons, maybe a few others, serpents. And you'll know if they are your totem animal because you're not afraid of them and they will come and support you at various times in your life. They may be physically present for you or just inwardly. Now, just want to say, if you want to learn more, you may wish to look at my course on Insight Timer called The Magic of Mother Nature. There you can meet your magical totem animals. So being picked as a shaman was a very honored and respected position. You didn't just say, hey, I'm going to be a shaman today. It was something that happened right from birth. And we hear that even in the traditions from Tibet, where they'd go out to find the child who was going to be a future Lama or even the Dalai Lama. And the way it was done was, one of the stories is that they would lay out various chalices or cups in front of this toddler and see which cup the child went for. And if they went for the one that was glossy and gold and silver, that wasn't probably going to be the future Lama. But they went for the one that was old and wooden. They knew that they had a child who was humble enough and honest enough to know what was right for them. So there are many different ways and stories I've heard about picking these particular individuals. And now I think it's important for me to say there are different types of shaman. I would say there are healer shamans, those who work specifically with healing. And of course, I will say that healing does lead to wholeness and transformation, but you'll often see them working with their hands, and we might call them energy workers or just healers. And they are, in their own way, shamans. And then we have the psychic shamans, the mediums, the fortune tellers. They too will have been seen as wise people. Maybe in the past they were called seers or oracles. And they had a prime position in the community. You would go to them for advice about what you should do and what they could see. And they often had a connection, of course, as all of them do, to the spirit world, to guidance, and be able to tap into that guidance to give you advice, as do the healers. And then there were the shamans or other shamans who work with the occult. Now, this is more like a magician or a sorceress or a witch. Again, these words a little bit interchangeable. And I always feel that if you're going to be a sorceress, and many of us have, or sorcerer or sorceress, this is more about knowing black and white magic. And perhaps this is the hardest role, and I think the least understood of all the shaman roles. Because for me, black and white magic is much more of a mental, intentional state. In other words, I am making a decision to do this. And it does involve personal choice. And so whatever my choice I'm going to do as a shaman who's working with the occult, I need to definitely know who I am. Now that's true of both the psychic and the healer, but that inner journey for someone who's working with magic is even more important. So I'm going to come to that. And then we have shamans who do all three. Okay, they are healers, intuitives, and work with magic. So I just want to talk about the different facets of that. And of course, there are wonderful books out there that you can read about shamanism. And of course, Alberto Villado wrote books, Michael Harner wrote books, the Carlos Castaneda books are all out there. And of course, many others that I'm not naming in this moment. But let's just look at those three categories. And again, keeping in mind that the purpose of the shaman overall is to bring transformation and illumination of the soul. Going along with my idea of the petals opening, and each time you open a petal of yourself, you learn about yourself or meet a subpersonality of yourself, you become enlightened. And personally, I don't think there's an end to that enlightenment. I think we're all enlightening all the time because we move through the dimensions to other realms and we find there's more of us out there, more parts of us that we need to discover. Now, when we do this transformation that we are working with as a healer, another very important facet of healing is the recognition, of shamanism, is the recognition of death and rebirth. And I know personally from many years ago that I had an experience of going through many of my shamanistic initiations where I had to learn about death and rebirth, mainly the death piece, and it wasn't very pleasant. But if you read anything about any of the trainings of medicine people, of shamans, there are different physical attributes of death and rebirth that they all go through: being buried alive, having to face their fears, being shut off in a chamber, whatever. I'm running out of ideas there, but I'm only saying is it's not just the death of the physical that we all have to face. Again, we're all going to die at some point. It's the death of our fears, the death of our beliefs that we are separate. And that's what I think that we have the greatest problem is in the Western world, or the world in which we see the outer world as our reality. And as we are working with death and rebirth, we have to face, as I've suggested, even every breath we die, and then we're inspired with a new breath. Every day we go to bed, we die, we sleep, we go into another altered state, we're reborn. Every month we die with the dark moon, we enter that altered state of nothingness, and we're reborn after the new moon. All of us have been through events in our life where we've died to a relationship, we've died to a job, we've died to a belief, we've died to something, and we maybe get stuck in that world of grief and sadness. But eventually it opens into a world of opportunities, freedom, and we are reborn into something new. So the idea of death and rebirth is not just, as I say, about surviving a physical death. Do we survive? Do we thrive? Do we know that moment, that gap between the death and the rebirth? That moment that we hold our breath out, or we go into that quiet space, maybe in meditation, where there is no thing, but everything is possible. That's the stage that shamanism and training in shamanism leads us into. That place where we can give up our ego needs, our personality, what we believed in. And as we let go of the external identities, we find ourselves inside and we go, wow. Now, that may be in a shamanistic journey, you meet parts of yourself that were hidden to you. Wow, I didn't know that part was there. I've been living out here. And I'm going to describe a shamanistic journey in a little while. But as I was researching this part of death and rebirth is an essential part of shamanistic training that I think that is maybe missing in some, if I may say, of the more superficial trainings. Because unless we can disconnect from ourselves, the level of healing, intuition, help we can give to other people is limited by our fear of dying to what we believe is true. So it's only when we have that courage to say, I let go of my beliefs, structures, and I won't impinge those on someone else, but I will be in that place of openness, compassion, nothingness, that we can really help someone else transform. And that to me is the development of sacred space for whatever we're doing. That space isn't about me holding a space that is true only to me. It's offering that non-judgmental, you could say non-time space offering to say, this is the compassion. I will witness, I will walk with you, but it is you that is bringing the healing to you. It is you that's going to find the answers. And so as we move into those three stages, I just want to talk a little bit about them. So we have the shaman who is the healer. And as I mentioned a few podcasts back, even this has a few issues with it, because even though we may say, oh, I just want the person to be well, to be that healer who doesn't only have one focus. I'm going to stimulate healing, or I'm going to suppress something, or I'm going to activate something, or I'm going to remove a obstruction. The true shamanistic healer sits back, goes into that space I just mentioned of nothingness, and listens to the body or the mind of their client or their patient, and says, which direction do I need to help this individual move into that will help them to find their wholeness? Do they need me to quieten something? Do they need me to activate something? Do they need me to remove a blockage? Do they need me to remove some ties maybe from beings, the spirits who have attached to them? Or do I need to maybe make a connection to some part of them that they've disconnected from? And I would say that's the gift of a true shaman healer, is to listen, to connect with, to talk to the body, to talk to the soul. And that gift is a gift truly of intuition. To be quiet, to hear, what does the body tell me? What's going on here? What does the soul want to tell me? How can I help? That's the shaman healer. The shaman psychic has very similar needs and aims, which is, how do I give information that is most appropriate to help this individual transform? And I know I've spoken about this before, but I've met many mediums in my life, and some of them will come along and say, I'm glad you are with me because you've got a tear in your aura, or you've got a black heart. And I've never really found that help me. So, compassion, friends. What is the most compassionate way I can meet someone that will help them to move in a direction of transformation and wholeness? I don't find it useful to tell someone, oh, you're going to be a fabulous healer and a fabulous writer or a fabulous anything, if they hate people or hate writing. Yeah, you might think it's feeding their ego, but actually doesn't actually help them. Sometimes the best advice is to be honest and say, I don't think this is your way. Let's find a different way. So the shamanistic medium, fortune teller, psychic, is going to connect with the soul again, but they may also connect, obviously, with spirit guides, as may the healer. So the psychic is more likely to say, I can connect to loved ones who have passed over. I can connect to your spirit guides, your soul family, your star family, to your totem animals. All of that is true. But once again, it's not about being able to do that. It's about, how is this helping this individual to become enlightened, to become illuminated? Is this bringing them more closely to themselves, or is it distracting them? So the information we bring, whether we're a seer, an oracle, a medium, a fortune teller, has to be relevant to the person's journey. And for that, we need to get out of our own way again and ask inwardly, what is the most powerful and the best message I can give that will help this individual on their journey? And then we have the shaman occultist. Of course, this is much more difficult maybe to take on board. But if you're going to be a shaman, you have to understand the underworld, the other world, the realms of the dark, whatever you want to call them. And the ability to work with the nature forces, or the forces of nature. So there are different types of occultists. There can be psychic surgeons. I've met a few. And psychic surgeons often have the ability to work with their hands and work with spirit doctors, or doctors in spirit, and the doctors work through their hands and bring about surgery that does not interfere with the physical body. Now, you may have heard of surgeons who do show signs that, they've done something to the body. But what I've heard from them is, well, we do this because then you'll believe it more than if we don't leave a trace at all. And I've seen that with other occultist workers. They'll say it helps for these people to see something. And so they are able to project their thoughts, their images out into the world. And you'll say, wow, I saw this. It's amazing. But that's just, if I may say, a magic trick to convince you that they are who they are. And so the occultist is more inclined to use magic and magic tricks and rituals, partly to enhance their power, but also to help you to believe in them. And when it comes to black and white magic, we've all, and I'm going to say we've all practiced this somewhere in our lives. And to me, black magic is that which moves away from life, and white magic is that which moves towards life. And I'm not going to say one is better than another. I've had my own experiences. What I am saying is it's a choice. And I have to make that decision. What am I hoping to achieve with this? Is this the most loving and compassionate thing I can do for this person, or do I not actually care? And it's not about judgment, it's about what my choice is. And we might call the black magic voodoo. And this happens across the world, different forms of voodoo. I remember being in an apartment in India where someone was showing me that her next door neighbor and the husband of the next door neighbor was losing a job. So the next door neighbor was sticking pins into the person who had the job the husband should have. And I was like, okay. And I've seen various things like that in other worlds and other places I've visited. But we don't only have to stick pins in something. We can do it through our own thoughts, can't we? First of all, we can be our own worst enemies. We can actually put ourselves down. But we can also curse someone. And I hear people saying, you know, I'm going to curse you to do that. I hope that happens to you. And if it's an intention that is strong enough, it can happen. Now, it's hard to know. There's always a decision whether or not you need to believe in that voodoo or that black magic for it to happen to you. But I think many of us have it deep within our psyche, so we do believe it or not. So I'm just saying it's not that you just go home and say, oh, I didn't think about it. If you are thinking about it, then you probably, if you're questioning, you probably do believe it. Now, putting that aside, I want to say that if we are going to work as true shamans, we have to do our inner work and meet our shadow side. And that doesn't matter, again, whether we're healers, psychics, or occultists. Unless we meet that side of us, we will always be either hiding from it and therefore not helping our client who does have some of that inside them. In other words, if we say, oh, no, you just transform that, send light to it, be the white light, just be loving. All of that is saying, because I'm terrified of going down into that place myself, and therefore I'm not going to take you there. So I only would trust someone who's working with my psyche, with my body, who has done their own inner work and knows their dark sides. I personally have done a lot of work to meet those parts in myself. And as I've described before, I now see them like clothes in a closet that I can go to each day and say, okay, I'm going to wear that. And then I go, nah, I'm not going to wear that today. I'll put it back in the closet. Inside us all, we have a tyrant, an abuser, a dark magician, whatever you want to call it. And to say, oh, I don't have that, says I'm not part of the collective consciousness. I'm not part of the human race, because whatever has happened collectively is more likely to be within us, especially, if I may say, if you have strong Scorpio energy. Just talking to a few of you out there. If you wish to be a shaman, it isn't important if you are or not, but if you are talking about yourself being shamanistic, you need to do this work. So just finally, to move on from that, let's just talk about how we do that work, or not even that work, but just have a shamanistic journey. Now, some of you may know that back in the 60s, they were using mind-altering drugs like LSD. You could maybe take ayahuasca, peyote. There are many of these mind-altering drugs. But they all were allowing your psyche in some way to quieten down and for your pineal gland, the pineal gland, to open up to these multiple dimensions that are available to us all. First of all, our own astral world, our own world of beliefs and emotions that I've been describing. And that was back in the 60s, and then they've used music mainly, and many traditions just use music and dance, rhythm, to entrain us to go out of our minds and into ourselves. And so you might be around someone who does drumming, dancing, entrainment music, where the deep drum is in the music itself. And the idea is to journey, to meet yourself. And for me, I always like to say, have an intention. I don't want to just say, go and have a journey. And so anything I do has always got an intention. Let's go and meet the parts of you that you would love to meet. Let's go and meet the parts of you don't want to meet. Let's go and meet the parts of you that are your totem animals. Let's go and meet your guides, your star family. We can go anywhere. And remember, all these are just parts of us. So as a guide, an ET, a star family, they're all just parts of our psyche, our higher self. And so I love taking people on journeys, as some of you may know. And you can do it yourself, but always be mindful of why you're doing it. And I would say, if you're doing it on your own, make sure that you do call in the loved ones that you trust to support you and hold your sacred space if you're alone in this process. It can be a little scary. It can be a little weepy. You might find that you are a little nervous. So I think it's really nice to do it with someone else. But ultimately, the aim is not to scare you. The aim is to become whole. The aim is to unsettle you on some level so that you will accept parts of you that perhaps have been waiting to be met. And I can guarantee you, they're not always the dark pieces that I've been describing. They're often the powerful piece, the loving piece, the inner child, the beautiful part of you. Sometimes we are much more easy to accept the darker parts of ourselves than the most beautiful parts of ourselves. So I hope I've inspired you to look at shamanism. I would suggest to you that important part, which is this person actually trained to take me into the places because they've been there themselves? Are they helping me to become illuminated and inspired and to be whole? And am I ready to do this work? Not because someone else is taking me there, because I'm ready to be whole and to know myself fully. Enjoy the journey, my friends. Until next time, bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Heart Speak podcast with Dr. Christine Page. Please check out all Heart Speak episodes in the podcast archive section on www.christinepage.com. HeartSpeak is also available on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Tumblr, and now playing on Amazon Music and iHeart Radio. You can also watch the archive podcast on Christine's channel, on YouTube, and now on Rumble. Connect with Christine on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook group, The Great Mother Calling. Do share with family, friends, colleagues. Join us next time for another edition of HeartSpeak.